The great crystal hall of the Galaxy Council had never been so quiet. Thousands of delegates from across the galaxy sat in stunned silence as they tried to process what they had just witnessed. The species they had mocked as primitive cave dwellers had accomplished something that the combined might of galactic civilization had failed to do for 10,000 years. Chancellor Vex stood at his throne, but his 6 arms trembled as he gripped the armrests. His 4 mandibles clicked nervously as he stared at the tactical display showing the debris field where the Void Swarm fleet had been completely destroyed. How he whispered, and his voice carried clearly in the absolute silence of the hall. How did they do it? We threw 10,000 ships against the Void Swarm and barely scratched them. The humans had less than 100 vessels, and they destroyed the entire fleet in 6 hours. Ambassador Kira had uncoiled her snake body and was lying flat against her platform in a posture that meant deep shock among her people. Her golden scales had turned pale again, but this time it was not from fear but from the overwhelming realization that everything she thought she knew about warfare had been proven wrong. Their ships were primitive, she said in a voice that was barely audible. Their weapons were simple projectiles and energy beams that we perfected millions of years ago. By every measure of technology, they should have been destroyed in the first 5 minutes of combat. The Silicon Brotherhood delegate sat motionless as his crystal and metal body processed sensor data from the battle over and over again. His computer brain was having difficulty accepting the evidence of what had happened. I have analyzed their tactics from every possible angle, he announced in his mechanical voice. What they did should not have worked. They violated every principle of space combat that has been developed over the entire history of galactic civilization. From the center of the hall, Captain Taman walked slowly toward the speaking platform. His boots echoed in the silence as every alien eye focused on him with an attention that was completely different from the mockery he had faced just months before. "You want to know how we did it," he said, and his voice was calm and steady, as it had been throughout this entire ordeal. "We did what humans have always done when faced with a superior enemy. We adapted." He stopped at the center of the speaking area and looked around at the thousands of delegates who were hanging on his every word. "The Void Swarm was built to counter every tactic and weapon that you have developed over millions of years of galactic warfare," he continued. "But they had never faced human tactics because humans were never part of your galactic civilization. Until now, Dr. Song Haijin's research vessel had docked with a human diplomatic ship, and she now stood beside Captain Taman to provide the scientific explanation that the aliens desperately wanted to hear. The Void Swarm's adaptive technology worked by analyzing patterns and developing countermeasures," she explained to the assembled delegates. "Human military doctrine is based on avoiding patterns and maintaining tactical flexibility at all times." Chancellor Vex leaned forward on his throne as he tried to understand what this meant in practical terms. "You are saying that your entire military strategy is based on being unpredictable?" he asked, with all 4 mandibles clicking in confusion. Admiral Kim had returned from the battle, and now he stepped forward to answer the Chancellor's question. His gray hair was disheveled and his uniform showed the stress of commanding a fleet in combat. But his voice was strong and confident. "Not just unpredictable, Chancellor," he replied. "Our strategy is based on adaptability. Every human pilot and ship captain is trained to think independently and make decisions based on immediate circumstances rather than following rigid battle plans." The alien delegates erupted in discussion as they tried to process this revolutionary approach to military tactics. In their cultures, military operations were carefully planned and executed according to established doctrine, with every movement calculated in advance. The idea of giving individual commanders the freedom to improvise and adapt during combat was completely foreign to their way of thinking. "But how do you maintain coordination without central control, Ambassador?" Kira asked as she slowly coiled her snake body back into a more normal position. Colonel Kim Jae-won, who had been studying alien military doctrines since joining the diplomatic mission, stepped forward to answer her question. "We use what we call mission-type orders," he explained. "Instead of telling our people exactly what to do, we tell them what we want to accomplish and let them figure out how to do it. This allows for rapid adaptation when circumstances change during combat." The jellyfish delegate from the Gas Giant Federation pulsed with colors that indicated deep confusion mixed with growing respect. "This goes against everything we understand about military organization," one of the Triple Star Alliance representatives said through his translation device. "How do you prevent chaos and friendly fire incidents when everyone is operating independently?" Captain Park Yuna, who had commanded the destroyer Defiant during the battle, smiled as she remembered the deadly dance her ship had performed between the void vessels. "We train constantly," she replied. "Every human military officer spends years learning to work with others while maintaining individual initiative. We call it disciplined flexibility." The concept was so alien to galactic military thinking that many delegates struggled to understand how it could possibly work, but the evidence was undeniable. The scattered debris field where the Void Swarm had been completely destroyed proved that human tactics were devastatingly effective. Chancellor Vex stood up from his throne and all 6 of his arms spread wide. As he prepared to make the most important announcement in galactic history, the Galaxy Council formally recognizes humanity as a full member with all rights and privileges of membership, he declared, and his voice carried to every corner of the Great Crystal Hall. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Applause erupted from delegates who had been mocking humanity just hours before. The sound was like a thunderstorm of alien voices, all expressing approval and respect for the species that had saved them from their greatest fear. But Vex was not finished with his announcement. Furthermore, he continued, "We formally request that Earth consider establishing a joint military academy, where human tactical innovations can be shared with the military forces of member worlds." The request sent another wave of discussion through the assembled delegates. The idea of learning military tactics from a species they had considered primitive was humbling, but the alternative was to remain vulnerable to threats they could not handle alone. Captain Taman looked around the great hall at the faces of beings who had once laughed at humanity and now looked at them with respect and even fear. He knew that this moment would change the course of galactic history forever. "We accept full membership in the Galaxy Council," he announced, and his voice carried the quiet confidence that had never wavered throughout this entire ordeal. "And we will be honored to share our knowledge with any species that wants to learn." But he was not finished, and his next words would be remembered for generations to come. "However, you must understand that we did not win this battle because we had better technology or superior numbers," he said, as his eyes swept across the thousands of watching delegates. "We won because we never stopped being human." Ambassador Kira raised herself up on her coiled body to ask the question that was on every delegate's mind. "What does it mean to be human?" she asked, and her voice held genuine curiosity instead of the mockery it had carried before. Taman smiled, and there was something in that expression that made even the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy realize they still had much to learn. "It means we are the species that looks at the impossible and asks why not," he replied. "It means we turn our weaknesses into strengths and our chaos into victory. It means we never give up even when every logical analysis says we should." He paused and looked directly at Chancellor Vex as he delivered his final statement. "Most importantly, it means we understand that the universe does not care about your plans or your technology or your superiority. The universe only cares about who can adapt and survive when everything goes wrong." The Great Crystal Hall fell silent again, as the assembled delegates absorbed the implications of what they had just heard. For millions of years they had built their civilizations on the principles of order, logic, and technological advancement, but humanity had just proven that sometimes the greatest strength was the ability to embrace controlled chaos and turn unpredictability into a weapon that could not be countered or defeated. As the Galaxy Council session came to an end and the delegates began to disperse, one thing was clear to everyone present: the age of human influence in galactic affairs had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. Earth had not just joined the galactic community, they had fundamentally changed what it meant to be a spacefaring civilization. The humans had taught the galaxy that sometimes the best way to solve an impossible problem was to refuse to accept that it was impossible in the first place. From this day forward, whenever the galaxy faced a threat that seemed too great to overcome, they would remember the day when humanity looked at the Void Swarm and decided that 10,000 years of undefeated terror was long enough. They would remember that sometimes the greatest power in the universe was not technology or numbers or. The battle raged for 3 hours as human ships tore through the Void Swarm's formation, like wolves attacking a flock of sheep. Every time the mechanical enemy tried to adapt to one tactic, the humans switched to something completely different, leaving the ancient computers struggling to keep up with patterns that made no logical sense. Commander Lee Minjin piloted his Corvette UAS Lightning through a gap between two Void destroyers that was barely wide enough for his ship. His vessel shuddered as enemy weapons fire passed close enough to scorch the hull plating, but he kept his course steady and returned fire with everything he had. The Void ship on his left tried to rotate its shields to block his attack, but Minjin had already switched from energy weapons to kinetic projectiles. The metal slugs punched through the enemy's unprepared defenses and tore into their hull, causing explosions that lit up the darkness of space. "All fighters, this is Lightning Leader," he called over the radio to his squadron. "Remember what they taught us at the academy. When your enemy expects you to zig, you zag. When they expect you to zag, you do something completely different." His wingman, Lieutenant Park Hyojin, laughed as she rolled her fighter through a series of maneuvers that would have been impossible for any computer to predict. She was 26 years old, and had been flying since she was old enough to reach the controls. "Roger that, Lightning Leader," she replied as she fired a spread of missiles at a Void cruiser. "These machines are so busy trying to figure out what we are going to do next that they forget to shoot back half the time." On the alien observation ships, the delegates watched in growing amazement as the human fleet continued to outfight an enemy that had never been defeated. Chancellor Vex gripped the armrests of his command chair with all 6 arms as he tried to process what he was seeing. "This is impossible," he muttered to himself. "The Void Swarm has adaptive technology that learns from every attack. They should be invulnerable to these primitive human weapons by now." Dr. Song Haijin's voice came over the communication channel, clear and confident as she explained what the aliens were witnessing. Chancellor, the Void Swarm's adaptive systems work by analyzing attack patterns and developing countermeasures, she said from her research vessel. But human tactics do not follow patterns. Every ship, every pilot, every weapon system is operating independently according to training that emphasizes creative thinking over rigid doctrine. Ambassador Kira coiled her snake body tighter around her observation platform as she watched a human destroyer execute a maneuver that should have been suicide. Instead of being destroyed, the ship used its momentum to slingshot around a void vessel and attack from an unexpected angle. But how do they coordinate their attacks without following standard formations? She asked. Military operations require discipline and organization. What they are doing looks like complete chaos. Captain Taman's voice answered from the human command ship, and there was pride in his tone as he spoke about his people's way of fighting. It is organized chaos, Ambassador, he explained. Every human pilot and ship captain is trained to think independently and make decisions based on the immediate situation rather than following predetermined battle plans. The truth was something that no other species in the galaxy had ever understood. Humans had learned to fight this way through millions of years of evolution and thousands of years of warfare. They were predators who had climbed to the top of their world's food chain, not through superior strength or speed, but through superior adaptability. Major Kong Su-ho led a squadron of heavy fighters in an attack run against a void battleship that was 3 times the size of his entire squadron combined. His pilots followed him not because they had been ordered to, but because they trusted his judgment and his ability to find a way to win against impossible odds. All Hawks, this is Hawk Leader, he called over his radio. We are going to attack that big one from 6 different directions at once. Pick your own approach vector and hit whatever looks important. Do not worry about coordination, just make sure you do not hit each other. The alien observers listened to this casual approach to military tactics with growing disbelief. In their cultures, military operations were planned down to the smallest detail, with every movement calculated and every contingency accounted for. But the human approach was working in ways that their careful planning never had. The void battleship tried to track the incoming human fighters, but each one was approaching from a different angle at a different speed using different tactics. Its defensive systems overloaded, trying to process 6 separate attack patterns simultaneously. The fighters struck like lightning, hitting weapon emplacements, shield generators, and engine systems in a coordinated assault that looked random but was actually perfectly timed. Within minutes, the massive void vessel was spinning helplessly in space with fires burning throughout its hull. Colonel Kim Jae-won watched the battle from his position as military advisor to the diplomatic mission, and he smiled with satisfaction as he saw human tactics proving their worth against an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia. This is how humans have always fought, he explained to the alien observers who were bombarding him with questions. We do not try to match our enemy's strength for strength. Instead, we find ways to use their strengths against them. The Void Swarm's greatest advantage was their ability to adapt to any threat. But that same advantage became a weakness when facing an enemy that refused to be predictable. Their computers were so busy trying to analyze human tactics that they could not focus on actually fighting the battle. Captain Yoon Seo-jin commanded the cruiser UES Thunderbolt, and she demonstrated this principle perfectly as she engaged a void heavy cruiser in single combat. Instead of trying to match the enemy's firepower, she used her ship's superior maneuverability to stay in the void vessel's blind spots. Every time the enemy ship tried to turn to bring its main guns to bear, Seo-jin was already moving to a new position. Her weapons were smaller and less powerful, but she was hitting vulnerable areas while the void ship's massive cannons could not find a target. The alien delegates watched this deadly dance with fascination and growing respect. They had never seen anything like the fluid, improvised combat style that the humans were displaying against their most feared enemy. Admiral Kim monitored the overall battle from his command center, and he could see that the tide was turning in humanity's favor. The Void Swarm's perfect formations had dissolved into chaos as individual ships tried desperately to adapt to attack patterns that changed faster than they could process. All ships, this is Admiral Kim, he announced over the fleet communication network. The enemy is beginning to break. Press your attacks, but do not get overconfident. These machines are still dangerous even when they are losing. Lieutenant Commander Oh Taeyong was leading a torpedo attack against a cluster of void escort vessels when his targeting computer identified what appeared to be a command ship hiding behind the smaller vessels. He made a split-second decision that would have violated every regulation in the book if he had stopped to think about it. All sword units. This is Sword Leader, he called to his torpedo bombers. Change targets to the big one hiding in the back. If we can take out their command ship, the rest might lose coordination. His pilots followed him without question as he led them through a maze of enemy fire toward their new target. They were flying by instinct and training rather than following any predetermined attack plan, and that flexibility allowed them to adapt to changing conditions faster than any computer could calculate. The torpedo attack succeeded beyond their wildest expectations. The command ship exploded in a brilliant flash that could be seen from the observation vessels, and immediately, The remaining void ships began to show signs of confusion and disorganization. Dr. Song watched her sensor readings with excitement as she saw the enemy fleet's coordination breaking down completely. "Admiral, the void ships are losing their network connection," she reported. "Without their command vessel, they are reverting to individual ship protocols. They are no longer operating as a unified force." This was the moment that Admiral Kim had been waiting for. The enemy was wounded and disorganized while his human fleet was still fighting at full effectiveness. "All ships execute final phase," he ordered. "Show them what happens when humans stop holding back." What followed was a display of controlled aggression that made the watching aliens understand for the first time why humans had risen to dominate their homeworld despite being physically weaker than many of the predators they had competed against. The human fleet fell on the disorganized void ships like a pack of hunters who had finally cornered their prey. Every advantage of superior technology and adaptive systems meant nothing when facing opponents who fought with the primal fury of evolved predators combined with the tactical sophistication of a spacefaring civilization. In less than an hour, the battle was over, and the void swarm that had terrorized the galaxy for 10,000 years was nothing but expanding clouds of debris drifting through space. The silence that followed was broken only by Admiral Kim's calm voice as he addressed the alien observers who had watched humanity achieve the impossible. "Galaxy Council, this is Admiral Kim J-1 of the United Earth Space Force. The void swarm threat has been eliminated. All human vessels are returning to base. In the Great Crystal Hall." The human fleet moved through space like a collection of metal boxes held together by determination and welding scars, compared to the sleek alien vessels that watched from a safe distance. The Earth ships looked like they had been built in someone's garage using spare parts and hope. Admiral Kim J-1 stood on the bridge of the USS Indomitable, watching the tactical display that showed the approaching void swarm. At 60 years old, he had fought in every major conflict humanity had seen since they reached the stars. His gray hair was cut short in military fashion, and his weathered face showed no fear as he studied the enemy formation. The void swarm's ships were massive black objects that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They moved in perfect mathematical precision, with each vessel maintaining exact distances from its neighbors. There were hundreds of them arranged in geometric patterns that hurt to look at for too long. "All ships, this is Admiral Kim," he spoke into his communicator, and his voice carried to every human vessel in the fleet. "Remember, we are not here to match their technology or fight them the way they expect to be fought. We are here to show them something they have never seen before." Lieutenant Colonel Choi Min-ho led the fighter squadrons from the cockpit of his modified interceptor. He was 35 years old, with the quick reflexes and steady nerves needed to pilot a small craft through the chaos of space combat. His fighter was covered in scratches and dents from previous battles, but the engines ran smooth and the weapons were ready. "Admiral, I have visual contact with the lead void ships," he reported over the radio. "They look exactly like the intelligence reports described, big black triangles that seem to suck up all the light around them." "How many fighters do they have, Admiral Kim asked as he studied his own sensor readings. "That is the strange part," Sir Min-ho replied. "I do not see any fighters at all. Just the big ships moving in perfect formation. It is like they do not think they need small craft to deal with us." On the alien observation ships, Chancellor Vex and his fellow delegates watched the human fleet approach with expressions of disbelief and growing concern. The human ships were not following any known tactical doctrine, and their formation looked like complete chaos. "What are they doing?" Ambassador Kira asked as she watched the human vessels scatter in all directions. Her golden scales had returned to their normal color, but her forked tongue still flicked nervously. "That is not how space combat works. They are breaking every rule of engagement that has been developed over millions of years." Chancellor Vex clicked his mandibles in confusion as he tried to understand what he was seeing. His 6 arms gestured at the tactical display, showing the human fleet spreading out like seeds thrown into the wind. "They appear to have no formation at all," he observed. "Each ship is taking a different path toward the enemy. This is either complete insanity or they know something we do not." The void swarm detected the approaching human fleet and began to adjust their formations accordingly. Their adaptive computers analyzed the incoming vessels and cataloged their weapon signatures, shield frequencies, and engine outputs. Within minutes, they had developed countermeasures for every piece of human technology they could identify, but they had never encountered anything like human tactics before. Captain Park Yuna commanded the destroyer US Defiant, and she smiled as she watched her navigation computer calculate an intercept course that would take her ship directly between 2 massive void vessels. Her crew looked nervous, but they trusted their captain completely. "Helm, take us into that gap between the 2 big ones," she ordered. "Navigation, plot a course that will let us hit their flanks while they are trying to figure out which way we are going." "Captain," her tactical officer said with worry in his voice, "that gap is barely wide enough for our ship. If those void vessels move even slightly, we will be crushed between them." "That is exactly what makes it the perfect place to be," Yuna replied, with a grin that made her crew realize their captain had a plan that none of them would have thought of. "All ships, this is Admiral Kim, execute pattern chaos." What happened next made the watching aliens question everything. They thought they knew about space warfare and military tactics. The human ships stopped trying to maintain any kind of formation, and instead began moving like a pack of wild animals hunting prey. Each vessel took a completely different approach to the battle, with some diving under the void formation while others climbed above it, and still others wove between the enemy ships like needles through cloth. Dr. Song Haijin watched the battle unfold from her research vessel, and she smiled as she saw the Void Swarm's adaptive systems beginning to overload. She was 42 years old and had spent her entire career studying alien technology and psychology. The alien observers bombarded her with questions over the communication channels, demanding to know how the humans were doing what appeared to be impossible. The Void Swarm's weakness is not technological, she explained to Chancellor Vex as she watched the enemy formation begin to lose its perfect precision. It is psychological. They think like machines because that is exactly what they are: logical, predictable, efficient, and completely unable to adapt to truly random behavior. The Void ships tried to bring their adaptive shields online to counter the human weapons, but every time they locked onto one attack pattern, the humans switched to something completely different. One moment they were firing kinetic projectiles. The next moment they switched to energy beams, then to electromagnetic pulses, then to weapons that the Void computers had never seen before. But that is impossible, Ambassador Kira protested as she watched a small human fighter outmaneuver 3 Void destroyers. You cannot keep changing weapon types that quickly. The power requirements alone should overload your systems and destroy your ships. Captain Tamin had moved to Admiral Kim's flagship to coordinate the overall battle, and he listened to the alien confusion with quiet satisfaction. His diplomatic training had prepared him for this moment, when humanity would finally show the galaxy what they were truly capable of. You are thinking like engineers, he replied to the confused aliens. We are thinking like survivors who have spent our entire history learning to fight enemies that were bigger and stronger than we were. The truth was both simple and devastating. While other species had focused on building bigger ships with more powerful weapons and stronger shields, humans had focused on being unpredictable. Every human vessel carried multiple weapon systems that could be swapped out in seconds. Every pilot was trained to think independently and make split-second decisions that no computer could calculate or predict. Colonel Lim Soyoung led a squadron of fighters that seemed to dance through the void formation, hitting weak points that should not have existed according to any tactical manual ever written. She was 29 years old and had learned to fly by racing through the asteroid fields around Mars, where one wrong move meant instant death. These machines keep trying to predict our next move, she radioed to her wingman as she rolled her fighter through a gap that was barely wider than her ship. Too bad for them, we do not know what we are going to do next either. This was humanity's, the secret weapon that no other species in the galaxy had ever developed: controlled chaos. While the galaxy had spent millions of years perfecting order and efficiency, humans had perfected the art of creative destruction and adaptive thinking. The Void Swarm's perfect mathematical formations began to collapse as human ships appeared in places where no logical tactical analysis said they should be. Their adaptive computers overloaded, trying to process attack patterns that changed faster than they could calculate responses. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Void Swarm was facing an enemy that refused to behave in any predictable manner, and their ancient programming could not cope with the chaos that humanity brought to the battlefield. Admiral Kim watched his tactical display with satisfaction as the enemy formation continued to disintegrate under the relentless pressure of human unpredictability. All ships continue current tactics, he ordered. Do not let them establish any kind of pattern recognition. Keep them guessing and keep them off balance. The battle that followed would be remembered as the day humanity proved that sometimes the best technology in the universe was no match for the one thing that could not be programmed or predicted: your human capacity for controlled chaos and creative problem-solving. In the observation ships, the alien delegates watched in stunned silence as their supposedly primitive human allies systematically dismantled an enemy that had terrified the galaxy for millennia. None of them would ever look at humanity the same way again. 3 months had passed since the Galaxy Council granted humanity observer status, and in that time Captain Tamin had learned more about galactic politics than he ever wanted to know. The aliens spent most of their time arguing about trade routes and territorial disputes while completely ignoring the real dangers that lurked in the dark spaces between stars. Then the Void Swarm appeared and everything changed. The first reports came from the Outer Rim colonies, small mining worlds that barely registered on galactic maps. The messages were short and desperate before cutting off entirely. Scout ships sent to investigate found nothing but empty space where thriving worlds had once orbited their suns. In the great crystal hall of the Galaxy Council, panic spread like wildfire through the assembled delegates. High Chancellor Vex stood at his throne, but for the first time since Timon had seen him, the six-armed leader looked uncertain and afraid. The Void Swarm has returned, Vex announced, and his normally steady voice shook with fear that he could not hide. After 10,000 years of silence, they have come back to consume our worlds. A collective gasp went up from the assembled delegates. Even the floating jellyfish creatures stopped their constant color changes and hung motionless in the air. The rock beings from the heavy worlds made grinding sounds that meant deep worry in their language. Ambassador Kira coiled her snake body tighter around her speaking platform, and her golden scales had turned pale with terror. Her forked tongue flicked out constantly, tasting the fear in the air around her. "My homeworld of Serpentis Prime is directly in their path," she announced with a voice that barely stayed under control. "Our long-range sensors show their fleet will reach us in 48 hours. Our planetary shields are strong, but they will not hold against the Void Swarm forever." The Silicon Brotherhood delegate made sounds like breaking glass as he tried to process this terrible news. His crystal and metal body flickered with error lights as his ancient computer brain struggled with the reality of the situation. "We have thrown everything we have against them," he reported in his mechanical voice. 10,000 of our finest warships attacked their advanced fleet. Less than half returned, and those that did were barely functional. Their adaptive technology learns from every weapon we use against them." Chancellor Vex raised one of his 6 arms for silence as the hall erupted in fearful chatter. When the noise died down, he continued with his grim report. "The Void Swarm is not like other enemies we have faced," he explained to the terrified delegates. "They are not alive in any way we understand. They are machines, but machines with a hunger that can never be satisfied. They consume entire star systems and turn everything into more of themselves." From the observer section, where humanity was forced to sit, Captain Taman had been listening to every word. Beside him sat the rest of the human diplomatic team, including Communications Officer Park Sujin and Military Advisor Colonel Kim J-1. Sujin leaned close to whisper in his ear, "Captain, the fear in this room is almost overwhelming. These beings have ruled the galaxy for thousands of years, but they are acting like children afraid of the dark." Colonel Kim was a veteran of the Mars colony wars, and his weathered face showed the scars of battles fought in the harsh environment of space. He had been studying the tactical reports as they came in, and his expression was grim. "Captain, from what I can tell, this Void Swarm uses adaptive shielding technology," Kim whispered. "Every time our weapons hit them, they learn how to defend against that type of attack. By the time you fire a second shot, they are already immune to it." Tae-Min nodded as he processed this information. He had been watching the alien delegates carefully, and he could see that they were thinking like engineers instead of soldiers. They saw this as a technological problem that needed a technological solution. But humans had learned long ago that technology was only as good as the mind that used it. Tae-Min stood up from his seat in the observer section. The movement caught the attention of several nearby delegates, who turned to stare at the human captain with curiosity and annoyance. "Excuse me, Chancellor Vex," Taman called out in a clear voice that carried across the vast hall. "Humanity would like to offer our assistance in dealing with this threat." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Laughter erupted from every corner of the great crystal hall as delegates who had been paralyzed with fear moments before now found something amusing to focus on instead. Chancellor Vex clicked all 4 of his mandibles in what passed for laughter among his species. His 6 arms gestured dismissively as he looked down at the small human captain. "Assistance," he repeated as if the word itself was ridiculous. "Captain, timing your entire species has barely 100 warships. We have thrown 10,000 vessels against the Void Swarm, and they were not enough to even slow them down." Ambassador Kira uncoiled herself and rose to her full height on the speaking platform. Her pale scales were already beginning to return to their normal golden color as mockery replaced fear in her reptilian features. "This is not a problem you can solve with primitive thinking," she hissed with her forked tongue flickering in amusement. "The Void Swarm possesses technology that is millions of years ahead of anything your species has ever dreamed of creating." The jellyfish delegate pulsed with bright yellow colors that meant it found the human offer hilarious. The rock beings made sounds like landslides, which was their way of expressing disbelief, but Taman did not back down or show any sign of embarrassment. Instead, he walked down the steps from the observer section toward the center of the great hall. His boots echoed in the sudden quiet as every eye in the chamber focused on him. "Numbers are not everything," he said calmly as he reached the speaking area in the center of the room. "Sometimes you need a different approach to solve a problem that has never been solved before." "Different approach," Ambassador Kira repeated with a laugh that sounded like wind through dead leaves. "Captain, this is not some simple engineering challenge that you can overcome with human stubbornness. These beings have adapted to counter every weapon and tactic known to galactic civilization." Tae-Min stopped walking and stood perfectly still in the center of the crystal hall. Around him, thousands of alien beings watched with expressions that ranged from amusement to outright contempt. But his voice remained steady and confident as he spoke. "Every weapon and tactic known to galactic civilization," he repeated slowly. "But they have never faced human tactics because humans have never been part of galactic civilization until now." Chancellor Vex leaned forward on his throne, his 6 arms gripping the armrests as he studied the small human captain. There was something in Taman's voice that made even the ancient leader pause and consider his words. "What exactly are you proposing?" Captain Vex asked, and for the first time his tone held a note of genuine curiosity instead of mockery. "Give humanity one chance to face the Void Swarm," Taman replied. "If we fail, you lose nothing that you would not lose anyway when they consume your worlds." But if we succeed in stopping them, you will know that humans deserve a place in this council as full members, not just observers. The hall erupted in discussion as delegates argued among themselves about this unprecedented proposal. Some thought it was madness to trust such an important task to primitive humans. Others pointed out that they were already facing total defeat and had nothing left to lose. Ambassador Kira slithered closer to where Taman stood and looked down at him with her reptilian eyes. Her voice was soft but filled with skepticism as she spoke. "And what makes you think that humans can succeed? Where the combined might of galactic civilization has failed?" she asked. Timon looked up at her without flinching and smiled in a way that made several nearby delegates step back involuntarily. There was something in that smile that spoke of secrets and hidden strength. "Because we approach problems differently than you do," he answered. "You see the Void Swarm as a technological challenge that requires a technological solution, but humans learned long ago that the best way to defeat an enemy is to become something they cannot predict or understand." Chancellor Vex was quiet for a long moment as he considered the human captain's words. Around him the great crystal hall waited in tense silence for his decision. Finally he spoke, and his voice carried the weight of authority that had ruled parts of the galaxy for 50,000 years. "Very well, Captain Taman. If your fleet can stop the Void Swarm or even significantly damage their forces, humanity will be granted full membership in the Galaxy Council with all the rights and privileges that come with that status." His mandibles clicked as he delivered what he clearly thought was an impossible condition. "But understand this, human. When you fail and your primitive ships are torn apart by forces beyond your comprehension, do not expect us to risk our remaining fleets trying to rescue you." Taman extended his hand in the ancient human gesture of agreement, even though none of the aliens understood what it meant. They could all sense the determination and confidence behind the simple movement. "Agreed, Chancellor," he said with the same calm voice he had used throughout the entire confrontation. "Humanity accepts your challenge." As he walked back toward the observer section, Colonel Kim leaned close to whisper urgently in his ear, "Captain, I hope you know what you are doing. From the tactical reports I have seen, this Void Swarm has never been defeated by anyone in the 10,000 years since." The great crystal hall stretched as far as the eye could see, filled with creatures that looked like they came from nightmares and dreams all mixed together. Some had 6 arms and blue skin that shimmered like water. Others looked like giant snakes with golden scales that caught the light. There were beings made of what seemed like living rock and others that floated in the air like jellyfish made of pure energy. This was the Galaxy Council, and today they were all gathered to laugh at Earth. High Chancellor Vex sat on his throne, made of black crystal at the center of the massive room. His 4 mandibles clicked together as he looked at the holographic image of a small blue planet spinning slowly in front of him. He was the leader of the Mantis Empire, and his people had ruled parts of the galaxy for over 50,000 years. To him, humans were nothing more than babies who had just learned to crawl. The sound of alien laughter filled the air as delegate after delegate stood up to make jokes about the newest species that wanted to join their great council. Ambassador Kira from the Serpent Worlds was the first to speak. Her long forked tongue flicked out as she tasted the air and found it amusing. She stood tall on her coiled snake body, and her golden scales caught the light from the crystal ceiling. Her voice was smooth like silk but filled with mockery as she spoke to the thousands of delegates watching from their seats. "The humans think they are ready to join us," she said with a laugh that sounded like wind through dry leaves. "They have been in space for less than 200 years. My people were traveling between stars when their ancestors were still living in caves and hitting rocks together to make fire." More laughter erupted from the crowd. A delegate from the Silicon Brotherhood made a sound like grinding metal that passed for amusement among his kind. His body was made of living crystal and metal, and he had been alive for over 10,000 years. "I have studied their technology," he announced in a voice that sounded like a computer trying to be sarcastic. "Their fastest ships can barely reach half the speed of light. Their weapons are simple projectiles that would bounce off our shields like pebbles. Their computers are so primitive they still use binary code." The laughter grew louder as more delegates joined in. A floating jellyfish creature from the Gas Giant Federation pulsed with colors that meant extreme amusement in its language. 3-headed beings from the Triple Star Alliance shook all their heads at once in disbelief. But it was Chancellor Vex who delivered the killing blow. He stood up from his throne, and his massive form cast shadows across the room. His 6 arms spread wide as he addressed the assembly, and his voice carried to every corner of the great hall. "Let me tell you what I know about these humans," he began, and his mandibles clicked with each word. "They fight wars with each other over resources that are common as dirt in space. They pollute their own planet and then act surprised when it gets sick. They have only one world and they treat it like garbage." The crowd was silent now, hanging on every word from their leader. "Their ships are held together with metal bolts and welded seams," he continued. "We have vessels that can reshape themselves at will. They use chemical rockets that create fire and smoke like ancient torches. We have mastered gravity itself and can fold space to travel instantly between stars." A new wave of laughter swept through the assembly, but Vex held up one of his arms for silence. He was not done with his speech. But the most amusing thing about humans, he said with all four mandibles clicking in rhythm, is that they think they are special. They call themselves the crown of creation on their little world. They believe they are the smartest species in the universe because they learned to make fire and build cities. The jellyfish delegate pulsed, bright orange, which meant it was laughing so hard it could barely contain itself. The rock beings from the heavy worlds made grinding sounds that shook the floor. Far away from the great crystal hall in the cold darkness of space, Captain Lee Taman sat in the pilot seat of humanity's first diplomatic vessel. The ship was called U.S. Discovery, and compared to the sleek alien vessels, it looked like a flying brick made of steel and determination. The bridge was small and cramped with just enough room for 5 people to work. Every surface was covered with buttons, switches, and screens that glowed with soft blue light. The air recycling system hummed constantly and sometimes made strange noises that worried the crew, but it kept them breathing. Captain Taman was 40 years old, with black hair that was starting to show gray at the temples. His face was weathered from years of space travel, and his dark eyes held the steady calm of someone who had seen both the beauty and danger of the universe. He wore the simple blue uniform of the United Earth Space Force with captain's bars on his collar. Beside him, Communications Officer Park Soo-jin worked at her station trying to clean up the signal from the Galaxy Council meeting. She was 28 years old with short black hair and quick fingers that danced across her control panel. Her job was to listen to alien communications and translate them into languages humans could understand. Captain, the signal is getting stronger, she said without looking up from her screens. I can hear what they are saying about us, and it is not good. Tae-min nodded slowly, but his expression did not change. He had expected this. Humanity was new to the galactic community, and they were clearly not welcome. Let me hear it, he said quietly. Su pressed a button, and the voices of the alien delegates filled the small bridge. Even though the translation software turned their words into Korean, the mockery was clear. The crew listened in silence as speaker after speaker dismissed humanity as primitive and worthless. They are calling us cave dwellers who accidentally stumbled into space, Soo-jin reported, and her voice was tight with anger. They say we are too stupid to understand real technology and too violent to be trusted with advanced weapons. The pilot, Lieutenant Nam Hoseok, turned in his seat to look at the captain. He was a young man of 25 with the quick reflexes needed to fly a ship through the dangers of deep space. His hands gripped the control stick tighter as he listened to the insults. Captain, should we respond? He asked. Should we tell them what we really think about their attitude? Not yet, Taman replied, and there was something in his voice that made his crew pay attention. Let them talk. Words are cheap and easy to say. Actions are what matter, and actions tell the truth. Back in the Crystal Hall, Chancellor Vex was reaching the end of his speech. The assembled delegates hung on his every word as he delivered what he thought would be the final judgment on humanity. Very well, he announced with a grand gesture of all 6 arms. We will be generous to these young humans. We will grant them observer status in our great council. They may sit in the back and watch how a real civilization operates its affairs. The crowd erupted in applause that sounded like a storm of alien voices all mixed together. Perhaps in a few thousand years, Vex continued, when they have learned to behave like civilized beings, they might evolve enough to contribute something meaningful to our great society. More laughter and applause filled the hall as the delegates congratulated themselves on their generosity toward the primitive humans. The bridge of the Discovery, Captain Taman listened to the translation with the same calm expression he had worn since the meeting began. When Chancellor Vex finished speaking and the alien laughter reached its peak, Taman reached forward and pressed the communication button. Thank you, Chancellor Vex, he said in a voice that carried clearly across space to the Great Crystal Hall. Humanity accepts observer status in the Galaxy Council. We look forward to learning from your wisdom and experience. The aliens were surprised by his polite response. They had expected anger or pleading, but instead they got quiet dignity. We hope, Taman continued, that we will have the chance to show you what humans can do when the time comes. He released the button and leaned back in his chair. Around him his crew waited for orders, but he just sat quietly looking out at the stars through the small bridge window. Soo-jin was the first to speak. Captain, why did you thank them after everything they said about us? Tae-min smiled for the first time since the meeting began, and there was something in that smile that made his crew realize their captain knew something the aliens did not. Because, Soo-jin, he said softly, they just gave us exactly what we wanted. They think we are harmless and stupid. They think we are no threat to anyone. That is the best possible position for humanity to be in right now. The crew exchanged glances as we began to understand what their captain meant. Let them underestimate us, Taman said as he turned back to watch the stars. Let them think we are just primitive cave dwellers who got lucky. When the time comes to prove what humans are really capable of, they will never see it coming. In the Great Crystal Hall, the delegates were already moving on to other business, having dismissed humanity as completely irrelevant to galactic affairs. None of them noticed the small smile on Captain Taman's face as he cut the communication link. None of them realized they had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history.